Hey, Tati here, and I am here with Dr. Eugene K. Choi. He is a certified transformational mindset coach. We're going to be talking all about high performance and anxiety and coming from a neuroscience perspective. So it is great to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to be here and grateful for you having me.
Awesome. So, can you tell us more about yourself and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. In the most succinct way possible, I'm basically a former clinical pharmacist turned filmmaker turned entrepreneur. So I went a lot into business coaching and mindset coaching as a result of that. Combining my healthcare background, that's where the neuroscience stuff comes in. And I got a lot of mentorship and training from multiple CEOs that run multi-million dollar businesses. So I learned a lot of business about business from them through coaching dozens and dozens of businesses over the last few years.
hmm Great. Yeah. So, it sounds like you have a unique set of skills and perspectives.
Yeah, all of them came together at one point to be able to serve my clients,
Mhm.
surprisingly, in the way that it did. Yeah.
Yeah. So, can you tell us more about because before we started recording, you had mentioned something about how many high performers may be coming from the place of fear and how that might play into that like survival mindset. Can you talk more about that? Because I think a lot of my listeners can probably relate to that.
100%. So I started diving deep into like the neurology of this, right? Because one of the ways I like to explain why this happened for me to begin with was, as adults, we love to sit down and watch a story, right? Like at a movie theater, right? At home on Netflix. And essentially it's because I'm about to ruin every mainstream movie. But if you look at every mainstream movie, it's basically a main character has a conflict, a problem, something that he wants to achieve. And the movie is that character overcoming their problems to achieve it. And we love these stories because at the end of the story, they're going through a significant internal transformation, not just an external one. So we all crave that. That's kind of what I've started to realize. And I'm going, how do you make this happen in real life, not just in the movies, for our own lives? Our internal transformation that we're all craving so badly. And that's where neuroscience came in. And the big aha moment I had as I started diving deep into these medical journals, studying the neuroscience more, is that the first thing we need to understand is that your brain operates in one of two states. Your whole nervous system operates in one of two states. It's what I call a survival state or an executive state. Okay. And the survival state is the part of your brain that's reactive. If we want to geek out on terminology, that's your amygdala, right? It's these two
Mhm.
almond sized piece parts in the back of your brain where it's reactive, meaning it cannot think. You're reacting without thinking. And it's meant for life threatening scenarios, like a tiger's in front of you about to eat you. Because if you start thinking, you might die, right? So that's the survival state. But the thing is, you can only be in one state or the other because the executive state, where if we want to geek out on term on where the brain is for that, it's basically your frontal lobe, your prefrontal cortex, which is right behind your forehead. This is where your amazing superpowers come from. Your ability to emotionally regulate, your ability to be creative, your ability to have critical thinking, problem solving skills, your empathy comes from here. And I realized, wow, if this is the part of your brain that all of your superpowers come from, the fascinating thing, the shocking thing was that research shows that on average, about 70% of our adult life, we're not there. We're in the survival state. A part of your brain that cuts you off from your critical thinking centers, your creativity, your empathy, your innovation. And the reason for this is we're not running away from saber-toothed tigers. It's because we're surviving from emotions that are uncomfortable. Because your brain perceives emotional pain the same way as physical pain based on research. It can be painful just as much as physical pain, emotional pain. So the brain still views it as a threat, which is why we get triggered into this survival state where we're reacting without thinking. So that was the big aha moment
Mhm.
going, wow, if we're in the survival state for a majority of our adult life, that means we're cutting ourselves off from performing better, producing more, connecting more with people, all because of this fear. And
Mhm.
that's where the survival state comes from. So that was the big aha moment for me. And one of the first things I talk about a lot is number one, the first step is all about awareness. If we're not aware of this, we can't change it. So I talk a lot about this to become aware of it, because I'm going to bring this back to exactly what you're asking about the high performing aspect is we have to be able to see it. I just gave a statistic for about 70% of our adult life we're in survival. But do we know why? Can we see it? That's number one. And so that's why I talk about the first thing to look at is, well, when you're in a survival state, because your brain's in a reactive mode where it's not thinking, it only knows how to react in three ways. It's called the fight, flight, freeze response. Fight, flight, freeze. In a life-threatening scenario, very obvious to see it. You're going to try to pick up a weapon to fight. You're going to run away in flight, run for your life in flight, or you're going to freeze, which is playing dead. Opossums are famous for doing this because their predators like their food alive. So when it comes to high performance, the illusion is we think we're performing, but we're actually in a fight mode. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So the fight response, when it's emotional survival, there's the more obvious ones, such as, someone says something hurtful and now you're fighting. You get defensive, you fight back. Or, both of us, I'm from the East Coast and you're in the East Coast, in road rage
Mm-hmm.
is another classic form of fight response, right? You get so pissed off, you got cut off. Now you're trying to cut the other person back off without any empathy or consideration of the cars around you that you might be putting at risk. But then there's this thing with a more subtle fight response, such as the need to prove yourself, the need to always be right. There's a fight there because there's some sort of thing we're surviving from. And it's usually a belief about yourself. I'm not worth much. I'm not good enough. I'm not capable enough. So this comes out as perfectionism, for example, overworking. I call it overworking. Some people call it high performing, right? But unless we're aware of ourselves that if we're in a fight mode, it always, always, always leads to burnout and a lack of fulfillment. Because when it comes to performance, if we're in this fight mode and it's driven by fear, anxiety, sometimes we're not even aware of it. Like, I'll give an example because I'm focusing on the fight one because in high performing space, a lot of people are in fight mode. I'll give an example. I had a client once. He was in his 60s, had everything you could dream of. He had the beautiful home he built from scratch, right? The amazing, nice, big home, the nice car, the multi-million-dollar business. And we're talking about this fight, flight, freeze response, and he has this moment of awareness. He's sitting there going, oh my God, my whole life I've been in fight mode. Because the reason he came to me in the first place was he was in his 60s. He got everything he thought he wanted, but why is he still experiencing a lot of anxiety and sadness and depression? And he comes to this realization, my whole life I've been in a fight mode. I've been fighting to prove to people that I'm better than my older brother. Because everyone always compared me to my older brother, who happened to be an NFL football player. Even his own football coach said to him to his face, stop trying. You're never going to be as good as your older brother. So think about this whole life in fight mode. How do you fight? Accomplishment after accomplishment after accomplishment. And you work your butt off to accomplish those things, but it doesn't feel as satisfying because the belief you're carrying to begin with is I'm not good enough. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
we've been surviving from the whole time. Is that making sense so far? Like, that's how
Yeah,
fight can affect people.
absolutely. Yeah. And it's interesting. I love that perspective because I hadn't thought of that overworking and performing coming from a place of fight. Um, I had thought of it as coming from a place of those internal fears and beliefs, but I like that perspective of looking at it as though we're fighting against something to try to
Correct.
prove ourselves or I'm curious if it's also could be coming from a place of feeling as though you have to survive or a fear like if because many times I
Exactly.
hear my listeners and clients say that they fear if they don't continue to work then they're gonna drop the ball, like everything's gonna fall apart.
Right. Exactly. But that's the illusion. You see what
Hmm.
I'm saying? Because I'll speak neurologically for a second because I know sometimes people get really like woo about it, like, oh, just trust the universe kind of thing, which there's a lot of truth to it, but I'm going to approach it from a neurological perspective, which is, well, think about it this way. I'll give another example because I think stories and examples are powerful. I had another client built his business from the ground up, all that good stuff, right? He was on the Inc. 5,000 fastest growing company, like all those things you could imagine, right? In terms of achievement, he got it. Um, and he started arguing with me, debating with me about this. He's like, no, sometimes you still need the survival state to fight. It's like, you don't understand. I hit rock bottom. I had my second wife leave me. She divorced me because she was cheating on me. My first wife cheated on me too. And he still had to pay $2,500 plus for child support. And I had to keep and the way he described it was, I had to keep my head down and my shoulder up, and I was bashing through brick wall after brick wall. I was fighting my ass off to get to where I'm at today. And he was debating with me. He's like, no, sometimes you need that survival state. Because neurologically speaking, the only time you really need it is if your life's actually in danger, like someone is holding a gun to your head. So I was just like, okay, well, let's just do a thought exercise. Just as a thought exercise. Number one, I want to make a disclaimer. This is not about what you should have, would have, could have done, because what should have happened happened. If it should have happened another way, that's the way it would have happened, right? So this is not about the past and changing the past. But what we're doing is let's just explore as a thought exercise. What if you being able to develop the skill set for yourself to be in an executive state more often, that's what gives you the power to put your head up and your shoulder down, because the analogy he was giving was I had my head down, shoulder up. And maybe what you finally see is those brick walls you said you've been bashing through were only 3 feet wide. Meaning, what if you didn't have to bash through them?
Mm-hmm.
You could have just went around. There's an infinite amount of other options. As a thought exercise, I did that. Because you see, when we're in the executive state, that's what your brain does. Because when you're in survival, guess what? You literally develop tunnel vision. It feels like you're walled, holed up into a corner with no other options when the tiger's ready to attack. And you develop tunnel vision because you're not sitting there going, let me examine all of my surroundings, right? When your life is
Mm-hmm.
in danger. But what happens when you're in the executive state is you get out of the tunnel vision and you're able to see things you weren't able to see because you were in survival, the opportunities, the creative solutions. Is this making sense? Right? It's like
Yeah.
you're developing the skill to see more than what you're not able to see otherwise when you're in survival. So when
Mm-hmm.
we're going into the thinking around, if I don't work, I can't, if I don't work this much, I can't solve the problem. It's usually operating already from a place of survival. The best way to tell is, how do you feel? Do you feel like you're backed up into a corner with no options? Guess what? The part of your brain you need is not turned on. And that's the fight response.
Yeah, and it sounds like when you're in that place, then people tend to feel like they need to stay in that place, from what I'm hearing you say, that like it seems like that's the only alternative.
Correct. Because your brain is literally interpreting it as a life-threatening scenario. It actually thinks it's going to die if it doesn't do this,
Mm-hmm.
because we're in that survival mode. And your
Yeah.
brain, your body is literally interpreting it as a life-threatening scenario. But unless you have a gun to your head with someone threatening to kill you, it's an illusion that we think it's a life-threatening scenario. We treat it like that, and we're reacting without thinking. And this goes deep neurologically, because honestly, it gets programmed into us to do it without thinking. Just like we don't walk down the stairs going left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. Our brain can do, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not whatever enough, on autopilot.
Mm-hmm.
The older we get.
So would you say that oftentimes this comes from these internal beliefs that people have or past negative experiences?
100%. So the way to think about it is, when you're born with 100 billion neurons, brain cells, right? That's just a fancy way for saying brain cells. But there's only 20 billion synaptic connections between those brain cells, right? Like between those brain cells. So what does that mean? This is why when you're born, you don't know how to do much. You don't know how to talk. You don't know how to walk. You don't know how to communicate fully with your words. But by the time you're 7 years old, guess what? You have the same 100 billion brain cells, but now there's a quadrillion connections between those brain cells. That's 15 zeros. So this is why, there's that saying that kids learn very rapidly. This is why that's true, because it's very, very rapidly recording information in the brain. But the thing to look at is, yes, it's recording factual information. This is the color green. This is the color white. But what most people don't realize is your brain also records meanings you're giving experiences. So for example, if you got bit by a dog at 4 years old, you might form a meaning that all dogs are dangerous, even though all dogs aren't dangerous. So we form all these meanings about life. I watched my parents struggle in their relationships, so therefore relationships must be really hard. And if they're not hard, it doesn't feel normal for me. So that's why I keep getting into these hard relationships or unhealthy relationships. Or about money. Money is hard to make. So unless it doesn't feel hard to make, it doesn't feel truthful to me. We form these realities in our brain, which, by the way, your brain gets very easily fooled into what's real. How do we know this? You ever been in a dream you thought it was real when you were in it? It's so easily fooled into what's real. For some of us, what feels real is, yeah, money's hard to make, life is hard, no one likes me, no one supports me. And this all triggers that survival state, and we go into that tunnel vision.
Mhm.
And we form these beliefs about life at an early age. Yes, a lot of them stem from childhood, right? All that kind of stuff. But these perspectives we form literally neurologically wire into your brain. And we operate from that lenses for the rest of our lives, unless we become aware that it's just a reality that got constructed in our brain. Because over time, it gets programmed. Just like you can program a computer to do the same thing every day, your brain gets programmed to think the same thoughts every day. We think 70,000 thoughts a day, 90 to 95% of those thoughts, same thoughts. And guess what? Majority of those thoughts, negative thought about yourself. Those thoughts of anxiety, stress, frustration. Guess what state you go into? Survival. And by the time we're about 35 years old, research shows that 90 to 95% of the brain becomes subconscious. It's on autopilot. So our brain literally wires to do this automatically over time. And unless we become aware of that and learn the skills to be able to rewire it, your brain will just continue to reinforce the reality that you got programmed into. Confirmation
Mhm.
bias, right? It forms
Yeah.
that bias to only focus on information to make what feels real to you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and you mentioned 2 ages I'm curious about. You mentioned 7. Is there
Mhm.
something that changes or occurs at that age?
So 0 to 7 is when it's that rapidly forming. Those connections are rapidly forming. And from then on, you've formed more of a perception about what feels real, like reality to you, if that makes
Okay.
sense. And then the programming gets reinforced over time, unless someone in their environment or someone they love helps them reprogram things that aren't actually true.
Mm.
But 0 to 7 is when a lot of it's getting rapidly recorded. We're still recording plenty of information every second. But it's just very rapid in that 0 to 7 age. And then now you have certain perspectives about life by that age. Does
Mhm.
that make sense? Right? It's like,
Yeah.
if I do this, I'm going to get in trouble, or this
Mhm.
is good, that's bad, or I'm not good, or something's wrong with me. All these form at an early age. Yes.
Yeah, and then you mentioned that at 35, then we're largely in the subconscious. So does that mean that it's more difficult to make changes after that point?
More challenging for certain people. Yes. Because the programming is the programming.
Mhm.
The programming wins a lot of the times because that's the whole point of programming is it does it without you thinking. That's the purpose of the reactive mode is when you're walking down a path and you see a snake in your peripheral vision that might attack, your body has to react without you telling it to jump. It just reacts without thinking. So that applies to a lot of our thinking as well, our beliefs, our perspectives by the time we're 35, which the one way I like to describe it is for anyone who's getting older, you ever have that experience where time is just passing by faster. Next thing you know, whoa, 5 years just passed, 10 years just passed. Guess what? It's because you're in that autopilot mode. You're doing it without thinking. So this is why we want to develop that skill set of becoming more and more conscious versus subconscious.
And is that something that is cultivated through mindfulness?
Mindfulness is a huge factor of it. Yes. So mindfulness is huge. I do a lot of meditation. I actually provide technology as well that can scan your brain during a meditation session to show if you're in survival state or not. And in live time, it will give you feedback saying, hey, you're in survival right now. So get out of it. So it helps mentally train you, kind of like you can be physically fit at the gym by physically working out, and also mentally working out. Um, and the way to view it is I put it into 2 buckets on how to develop this skill. There's short-term work and long-term work, meaning the short-term work are like the tips and tools, right? What do you do when you're aware that you're in survival, right? Fight is the whole overworking thing. Flight is things like procrastination, numbing yourself, right? Some people overindulge in things like alcohol, sex, and drugs to a point of addiction. That's the fleeing response. People flee to work, by the way, too. A lot of over high performing people have that problem.
Mhm.
They find comfort in their work, so they flee to their work as a fleeing mechanism, or they freeze and shut down, right? They freeze in action. So the more we become aware of this when we're in this survival, and the cheat sheet I give is if it doesn't feel good, there's a good chance you're in survival. If the emotion feels uncomfortable, you're going to try to react to it. So the short-term work is just once you're aware, there's a couple of tips and tools that I give, which is number one is label your emotions. So UCLA did this study that was really fascinating. They had people's hooked up to these brain scans, and they would show these individuals pictures of people's faces in a survival emotion. Remember, it's just an emotion that feels uncomfortable: fear, depression, anxiety. Soon as they show the picture of that emotion, guess what? The amygdala lit up. The survival brain lit up immediately when they saw the person's picture of the person's face. And what was fascinating was the researcher would ask the participant, hey, can you tell me what emotion you're seeing in this photo? Now, the participant will be like, oh, easy, that's anxiety, or that's frustration, that's fear. The moment they labeled it, guess what happened? Fear brain, survival brain turned off.
Mm.
Executive state turned on. The prefrontal cortex turned on. Why? Remember, you can't think when you're in survival. To label something requires you to think about it. So when you label an emotion, you're literally helping yourself emotionally regulate. So that's why I tell people label your emotions. So now there's a distinction here. I had a clinical psychology friend of mine, a psychologist friend of mine. He said there's a subtle yet important difference between the language you use, such as I am sad versus I feel sad. I am sad is presuming it's your identity, right? Like I am Eugene, I am Tati, right? It's presuming that's your identity. So if you think that feeling is your identity, you're going to stay stuck in survival, trying to survive from that feeling. Versus I feel sad is acknowledging the fact that feelings come and go. How do we know feelings come and go? Because feelings come and go. Sometimes you feel happy, sometimes you feel sad. So when you do that, you're helping regulate yourself, get out of survival, go into that executive state, turn on your creativity, turn on your critical thinking skills, your performance, your productivity. So you can work smarter, not harder, right? So when you teach yourself that, it's good to label your emotions. I feel sad, even if you're doing it in your own head. I'm feeling frustrated right now. I'm feeling disappointed. So that's one tip that I always give to people. And the second tip is breathe, deep breaths. It's very cliche, but there's a lot of science behind this because beneath your diaphragm, where your lungs are, you have these parasympathetic nerves. Just like your brain has two states, so does your body. Parasympathetic nervous system, sympathetic nervous system. Just view one as the accelerator and one as the brakes, right? Your sympathetic nervous system turns on when you're in front of a tiger that's about to eat you. Your heart's racing, your lungs are overworking, your digestive system shuts down, which is, by the way, where a lot of people who have stress have digestion issues, right? Because their digestive system is shut down. And adrenaline's pumping your blood. So people who have sleep problems that are stressed out, that's why. So when your body's in a survival state and it's overworking, which, by the way, it's wasting a lot of energy, it's going to burn you out very fast because your body's not meant to be in survival long term, by the way. But for a lot of people, it is. When you take these deep breaths, you're tickling those nerves at the bottom of your lungs that turn on the part of your nervous system that helps you relax, recharge, and recuperate, which is your parasympathetic nervous system. So when you take these deep breaths, it relaxes your body. So when you're feeling in survival and you're aware of it, it's important to breathe, slow down. And there's two types of breathing I recommend, which is just box breathing, which is 5-second inhale, hold it for 5 seconds, 5-second exhale. And the second type of breathing, I learned it from an amazing neuroscientist at Stanford. His name's Andrew Huberman. And they literally had scans of people doing this type of breath, and you watch the body relax. It's a deep inhale, inhale again, and then slow exhale. And that helps relax your body because your body is the first thing to respond to information, by the way, and the first thing to react to information. So you want to keep your body relaxed as well so that your executive brain can turn on. So those are short-term things amongst other things, right? So when you do that short term, it helps you start building your awareness. Long-term wise, because like we said earlier, it's hardwired into our programming. Sometimes the programming is the programming, and when we're in it, we're in it. It feels real to us. Is the rewiring of your brain, neurologically rewiring your brain. And there's processes that you can go through. That's something I do. It's just I bring a client through the process through education, training, coaching, plus technology, like I mentioned before, that helps you rewire your brain. But one of the first things that I mentioned in terms of the long-term work is just turn it into a game of awareness. You see someone get cut off on the road. This is what mindfulness is too. Actually, it's awareness building.
Mm-hmm.
It's you see someone get cut off on the road and they flip their lid and now they're trying to cut the other person back off. It's like, oh, there's that fight response Dr. Eugene talked about. That's a survival state. Someone's a perfectionist and overworking on your team. If you're a leader, oh wow, I see this can be a fight response in the person.
Mm-hmm.
They're not feeling safe for whatever reason, because this is what it all comes down to. If your brain doesn't feel safe, it's going to go into survival. Psychologically, if you don't feel safe, we're living our lives in this state where we're like the walking dead. We're just reacting without thinking. So mindfulness is a huge role in this, because if you're not aware of it, how can you change it, right?
Yeah.
If you have that piece of broccoli stuck between your teeth, how do you have the awareness and the power to remove it unless it comes into your awareness, whether someone points it out to you or you see it in the mirror?
Mm-hmm.
The name of the game is awareness building. That's what starts the long-term work and the rewiring, because you start to see what's actually true, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so you mentioned noticing when somebody else is in that state, and oftentimes it's a sign that they're not feeling safe. So
Correct.
why do you think, if you have an idea, so many people are in these constant states of feeling unsafe, even though
Oh,
objectively they
yeah.
may be safe?
Correct. Um, there's so many variables to this. Think about this for a second. We're in America. Media, you turn on the news, what do you see? School shootings, unfortunately,
Hmm.
dramatic politics, of course, as of late, the pandemic. All of these things feel unsafe for us. So, boom, brain goes into survival. Fight, flight, freeze, fight, flight, freeze. That's all it does. I'm going to fight to get rid of this feeling. I'm going to flee from this feeling. I'm going to freeze from this feeling. There's also culture. Some cultures where parents are overworking their children, have high standards for their children, making their children feel unsafe. Whoa, if I don't perform for my parents the way they want me to, it feels like they're not going to love me. So I'm going to fight for their approval. Or some people flee by running away from home, right?
Hmm.
And most importantly, our inner world feels unsafe too, because we've formed these beliefs about life that make us feel unsafe on a daily basis. And you see, the list goes on. There's so many reasons why we might interpret certain things as feeling unsafe for ourselves when it's not true. Literally, with your own thinking, you can feel unsafe. Think about this. Even though nothing's happening around you, sometimes when we think about something sad, now we're feeling sad.
Hmm.
Sometimes we think thoughts about something that feel good, and now we feel good, even though nothing's changing outside of us. You see what I'm saying? That's how powerful our thinking is. It actually causes feelings in our body, neurologically speaking, too, right? When you have a thought, there's electrical activity that occurs in your brain. It releases these chemicals called neurotransmitters, makes it to your body, and now you're feeling the feeling. That's why when you think about something sad, you feel sad. That's the process, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And for a lot of reasons, we feel unsafe. And then we form these beliefs about things and perspectives about things that help us, that make us feel unsafe on autopilot. I'm not good enough, not smart enough. And the list goes on, doesn't it?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So really our beliefs create our reality.
Yeah,
And I'm hearing that a lot of it from what you're saying really comes from these emotions that we experience. And then the
correct.
emotions inform our reaction.
100%. 100%. So like your emotions have a lot to do with this too, by the way, right? So guess what? A lot of high performers, they don't sit with their emotions.
Hmm.
They're using their logic. That's the other half of your brain, right? The left hemisphere. They think they can figure their way out. They can fight their way through getting rid of the uncomfortable emotion that's there.
Hmm.
I'll share a quick story if that's okay.
Yeah.
Making a point about this. I got to briefly get coached by this amazing coach. Her name's Rhonda Britton. And I have to give context of her story because she says something so powerful to me um, when she was training us. Is at 14 years old, her parents were in the middle of a divorce. It was Father's Day. They were going out for Father's Day brunch. So her father was someplace else and came to pick them up. Drives up to the front of the house. Mom and Rhonda are going out of the house while sisters are inside still getting ready. Dad gets out of the car, goes to the trunk, says, I'm going to go get my coat. Doesn't get his coat, pulls out a shotgun instead. Walks over to mom, very upset and distressed, blaming her for stuff, yelling at him, saying, you made me do this. Proceeds to shoot mom in front of Rhonda. Then points the gun at Rhonda. And mom is still alive. So she's yelling, shouting, don't do it. Dad didn't know she was still alive. So he points the gun back at mom, proceeds to shoot her a second time. Looks over at Rhonda, points the gun at himself, and then pulls the trigger. Murder, suicide. 14 years old.
Wow.
She was the sole witness of a murder suicide. And you'd imagine a trauma like this can impact a child significantly, right?
Hmm.
So she went into full on survival state, fight, flight, freeze. How did she fight? She kept her grades up at school. She stayed a straight A student, thinking subconsciously, if I continue to fight to keep my grades up, maybe this feeling will go away. This pain will go away. How did she flee? Alcohol. She numbed herself with alcohol, became an alcoholic. And how did she freeze? Sometimes you wake up from in the morning and don't want to get out of bed. Inaction. And she also fled another way, which was suicide. She tried to commit suicide 3 times. The biggest form of flight, if you think about it, right? To end your life. Yet she turned her life around. She became this amazing coach that was helping tons of people. She even got her own television show, reality television show, where she's coaching people on TV in the 90s, and it won an Emmy Award. She's been on Oprah not once, but twice. And she turned her life around. Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And she said this thing where it shook me to my core. She said, until you're willing to be wrong about everything you know, nothing will ever change. Until you're willing to be wrong about everything you know, nothing will ever change. And this shook me so much because I'm highlighting the word willingness here. I'm not here to say like everything you know is wrong. I'm highlighting the word willingness because she was willing to be wrong about life sucks. I'm all alone. No one supports me. I'm not loved. Whatever perspective she might have formed because of her trauma, she was willing to be wrong about it. It's the very thing that helped transform her life. So when we're more willing to be wrong about what we think is real, like I said earlier, because what you think is real is usually not real, we get very easily fooled into what we think is real. That's when everything changes. And the bottom line lesson that I've learned from all of this is I remember this leader that was asked a very cliche question about relationships. How do I find the perfect partner, quote unquote, the one for me? As if there's such a thing as this one person in this world that you can hold 100% responsible for your happiness.
Yeah.
It's the brain survival mechanism going, I don't feel loved, so I need something outside of me that I can hold responsible to make me feel loved, right? We're holding the outside thing responsible. And it's also an insurance policy. I want to hold someone else responsible for my happiness so that if I'm ever unhappy, at least I have someone to blame. It's a survival state mechanism. So the leader understood this. He was conscious of that. And he just asked a really powerful question, which was, would you go out with yourself? And I remember being blown away by this question for 2 big reasons. Number one, I immediately became aware of my reactive answer being, no, I want to go out myself. Because it's easy to see all these things about yourself you don't like, right? And I was like, oh, okay. You kind of hear this kind of stuff in personal development, self-care, self-love. And I was just like, okay, that's a cool awareness to have. But I had a second big breakthrough, which was, if I don't love me, I can't love other people. I can tell my wife I love her and I do all these nice things for her because I love her. But if I don't love me, if I don't have a healthy relationship with myself, those things I'm doing it for her, I'm not doing it for her to be in the first place. I'm doing it for me. You see what I'm saying? I carried a belief that I don't matter. So therefore, I will fight by doing these nice things for other people. And maybe one day I will feel like I matter. It's a survival mechanism. How do you know it's survival? It's very transactional. Case in point, when I would get into arguments with my wife, what's the first thing I bring up? I fight and go, I do all of these. I keep track of what I've done, right? I do all of these things for you. Why don't you do this for me? The same applies to my kids. I can say I love them. I do all these things for them. But if I don't love me, I'm not doing those things for them. Same with my clients. I can't powerfully serve my client because when you're in survival, you literally can't be empathetic, right? If a tiger's in front of you about to eat, you're not being empathetic, going, I wonder how this tiger's doing. Is this tiger's parents feeding him? Okay, right? We can't be empathetic when we're in survival. That disconnects us from the people around us. So why am I bringing any of this up? It's like, that was the big realization for me is when you create a healthier relationship with yourself and you invest in yourself, that's when everything changes because you love yourself. And you're willing to be wrong about what you think is true, such as, if I don't work my ass off, I can't get the things I want. And the rabbit hole goes deep around this, but that's the thing to understand is, what does a healthy relationship with yourself look like though? And that's bringing this full circle to the thing about feelings. You see, I've been sharing this perspective a lot with my clients recently. It's like, think about this for a second. Your lungs breathe 2 million liters of air every day. And within seconds, it transports all that oxygen into every cell in your body. Your heart is beating over 100,000 times per day, pumping all of that blood through 60,000 miles of blood vessels every single day. That's
It's a lot.
miraculous.
Yeah.
Every second, 25 million cells are replaced.
Mm.
Whoop, there's another 25 million that just got replaced. And the question I like to pose is, well, are you figuring any of this out? Or is your body figuring itself out? Are you telling your heart to beat every second, all 100,000 times? And your body's figuring itself out. And in biology, there's a phrase called homeostasis, which is just fancy for balance. Your body will naturally try to achieve balance if you get out of your own way. When you're in stress, you're putting it out of balance because your body's overworking now because it thinks it's about to die. But if you relax, your body will find its way back to balance. Your body will recharge, recuperate. It's called a rest and digest state. That's the executive state. Well, if you would agree with me that your body will naturally try to achieve balance, like that's what it naturally wants to do, then I ask, what if what your feelings are, it's your mind's way of trying to achieve balance in the mind? But for so much of our life, we fight from the feeling, right? We fight to get rid of the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
We flee from the feeling, thinking it's a threat, and we freeze. We shut down from the feeling. What if you can trust your feelings? That if you simply just be with it, you don't have to do anything with it. Then that's the very thing that helps neurologically shift your brain so that you can get back into executive state and see all the opportunities and solutions that already exist in the present moment. When you learn how to do that, that's when everything changes for you.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's a lot of the fighting against not just wanting to survive, but also fighting against the very emotions and the things that we're feeling. Like,
100%.
yeah.
And I visualize this for people. You ever see that false scare scene in a horror movie? Music's
Yeah,
getting
yeah.
intense, bushes are rustling, and then what pops out is like this cute little bunny.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's happening in our brain when you're feeling a feeling that's uncomfortable. The music's getting intense, the bushes are rustling, but before we see what's actually in the bushes, we're already in fight, flight, freeze mode.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying? I'm busy. Oh, let me work harder to get rid of this feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Let me run for my life by distracting myself. Let me flee to alcohol. Let me flee to sex. Let me flee to drugs before looking at where this feeling's coming from. But if you simply just stay put, be present, be mindful of the feeling, you know what reveals itself? It's usually like a cute little kid version of yourself. It's that 5-year-old version of you, that 11-year-old version of you that may have gone through a trauma and interpreted that experience as something wrong, being wrong with you. The one part of you that's scared because you don't feel like you're worth much based on an experience that you interpreted a certain way and formed that belief. And that kid needs a hug. That kid needs you, because the moment you feel the feeling, now it's a past version of you. That's what the feeling really is. It's a memory. It's a record in your brain that you recorded from the past. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And it's how willing are we to sit with that more often and trust it?
Yeah.
Because that's your mind trying to go back to balance, just like your body will go back to balance if you're willing to just be with it, even though it's uncomfortable.
Yeah. So it seems like
And
it's a process of really unlearning all of the automatic reactions and resistance to the things that we have learned throughout our lives.
Exactly. And we just do it on autopilot.
Mm-hmm.
So the first part is just awareness. Once you're aware, you can see it. Whoa, this is all survival. Then you might be more willing to learn how to approach it. And this is just a skill set. It's a competency. People can learn this, right? That's kind of the trainings I bring people through, how to rewire their brain, be more aware of this and all that. And once you learn it, then you can implement it, what you learned, and you experience the benefits of it. Then you might finally feel like a huge weight's been lifted off your shoulder. You might be able to see things that you weren't seeing before, such as another opportunity or easier solutions, if that makes sense. Because a lot of people do believe that life is hard, for
Mm-hmm.
example, and your brain will do the confirmation bias thing
Yeah.
to only focus on information, which, by the way, your brain filters out 90 to 95% of your current experience, by the way.
Mm.
It does it because if you're paying attention to all the information around you, you'd go crazy. It would be ADD, like you'd have major ADD.
Mm-hmm.
So within all of that filtered information, what if there's an opportunity or solution that you're not seeing? And if we train our brains to get into the executive state, we'll be able to start seeing it.
Yeah, and that makes me think of what I teach a lot of my clients. It's like practicing focusing on the positive because we're so sensitive to the negative and that survival state, kind of priming our brains to be more aware of the potential opportunities like you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. And you see, the deeper you go into this rabbit hole, certain concepts just start not making sense either. You see, a survival state needs black and white. When we're afraid, we need black and white answers, which is why we go into black and white thinking when we're afraid. You see, if you think about that, this is the cause of suffering in the world. It's black and white thinking. And it's usually a dualistic scenario. It feels like it's one side or the other. And they pit themselves against each other. They're busy fight, flight, freezing from each other. They're trying to fight to prove the other party wrong. When there's so much gray area, pro-choice, pro-life, right? Vaccine, no vaccine, Democrat, Republican, right, wrong, good, bad, positive, negative. All these dualistic scenarios feel so real for us when we're in survival, when there's so much more gray area. And when you're in executive state, you get to experience every shade of color that's out there if you teach yourself how to do it. And that's where it needs that black and white thinking, because if you're in front of a tiger that's about to eat you and there's gray area, you might die.
Yeah.
So how willing are we to step into that? Where I call it truth, right? What you call positive, right? Like focus on, I call it focus on the truth, because what you think is negative is probably not even real anyway to begin with. And can you see how it's not real? And when we train ourselves to do that, brain totally rewires and you can't unsee it anymore. You know, like that movie scene where it's like, you thought the good guy was the good guy and turned out to be the bad guy. You can't look at the person the same ever again, or vice versa, right? You thought the bad guy was the bad guy, turned out to be the good guy. It's the same with our thinking. So when we get better at this, yeah, like we get so empowered. And what you truly see is there's a lot, everything's positive. Like that's the cool part. If you're willing to be wrong about what you think is negative, if that makes sense, right? The willingness to go there and get guided. Yeah, that's my long-winded way of explaining that.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I love how you explain it because, especially for, excuse me, the way that I think about things is that it really helps me to have the underlying reasons, like you're saying, kind of
Yeah,
that person going to the logic type of thinking. That's the way that my brain works is that, if I don't know why I'm doing something or, and I've experienced that with a lot of my clients where they're like, oh, my past therapist told me I had to take deep breaths, but I didn't even know why. And then I explained to them why and kind of what you were explaining with the parasympathetic nervous system. And I think that can connect it so much more for people so they
yeah,
can really understand, like, why am I doing this and what's the benefit of this?
yeah. And I think that's the gap in a lot of personal development, isn't it? They just tell you
Hmm.
what to do. Go
Yeah.
breathe, go journal, go meditate. I mean, these are all really amazing things. But then until you have an understanding of how it works, why it's important, you don't have an appreciation for it as much of an. So that's my mission, is like, I want to show people how this works. That's why I talk about the science behind all of this.
Hmm.
Because this is why some people go to therapy for 10 years and go, why am I still not
Hmm.
improving? Or why am I still not getting the result? It's because everyone has the capability to take it deeper. And there's many layers to be peeled. The rabbit
Hmm.
hole goes deep, right?
Yeah.
But it's an amazing journey if you allow yourself to go there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and this was a really interesting conversation, and I'm sure that my listeners will find a lot of value in it. And do you have anything additional that you want to add?
Yeah, if anyone wants to take some of the content deeper, learn more about the stuff I teach, I have a free training on my homepage that does talk about those two short-term things that I mentioned earlier, right? And how to deal with survival, and then some, a couple of more things to learn about. That's on my homepage. So it's destinyhacks.co. On the homepage, there's a free sign up for a free training that you can get. Otherwise, I also started a podcast last year that I'm actively trying to create more episodes on, and that's called the Neurohacking Podcast. And you can find that either on my homepage or just neurohackingpodcast.com.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and I'll leave links to all of that in the description. All
Awesome.
right. Well, it was great to have you here, and I had such a great time talking to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Tati. I appreciate it.